Well, big tech vis-a-vis the Trump administration. That's what it seems like, right? It's what it seems like on a very superficial level. Big tech like Amazon, Apple, Google, and the latest was Amazon kicking the, I suppose you could call Parler a conservative forum, the conservative version of Twitter. I think if you're on Twitter for about 5 minutes, you know that it leans all the way to the left. And Parler was supposedly going to be something that leaned all the way to the right and offer conservatives a place to interact. Well, then came the riot in Washington. And because of that, there's been great overreaction all over the country. But the way Amazon, Apple, and Google reacted was by taking the Parler app down. And now it doesn't exist, and it is scrambling, according to its CEO, John Matz, to try and find some sort of platform to distribute his product. So there is an example of what censorship looks like. And now we heard in an Instagram release by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez yesterday, the congresswoman from New York, I believe she's from Queens, that there ought to be a committee formed. She wants to form a committee to look in how to rein in essence, free speech, censorship. And is it directed just at one side, or is everybody going to come under this glaring light? Let's bring in a good guest to this program, Adam Rizzieri. He is the Chief Marketing Officer with Agency Partner Interactive. Even better than that, he knows this stuff inside out. Adam, how are you on this glorious Saturday?
Ken, doing great. It's Saturday.
You can't beat that, can you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, so I know what Parler is. I'd gone on there to graze and to look. I understand what was going on there. From what these big tech companies, Amazon, Apple, and Google, are saying, that there was no moderation of the comments on Parler, and that, in effect, led to the riot in Washington about 10 days ago, because Parler was being used as kind of a quote-unquote meet-up app. Let's talk about that for a second. Was there moderation of comment on Parler?
Absolutely. There's always moderation to an extent on most of these platforms. You could argue probably mathematically, if you look at the amount of users that Parler has versus the amount of users that Twitter has, by virtue of math, I'm sure that the ratio of moderation was probably actually more extensive on Parler than probably on Twitter with their 330 or so million users. Parler does, or did, I guess now, make active efforts to police their forums from things that, obviously were spreading terrorist thoughts and terrorist plots and anything that would come from a terrorist organization. It was working to actively ensure that there was nothing related to, obviously, child pornography and other things that may be very obviously illegal. On top of that, too, Parler made a very active effort to verify every single user on their platform. To be a verified user on Parler, you had to submit a picture of your driver's license, your state-issued government ID. Whereas on Twitter, you could just create an account with a goofy name and tweet whatever it is you're going to tweet. So, to argue that Parler was being used to organize this terrible situation that we saw take place at the Capitol, it's really hard to make that argument when the realization is that social platforms in general have terrible content on their platforms. There's great content and there's terrible content, and unfortunately, messages of hate and messages that are just very, very not PG-13, they exist on these platforms, and the moderators cannot catch it all.
Yeah, no, if you go on Twitter, it's where hate goes to live. I mean, there is more hate on that app than any place I've ever seen in my life. There's some very good stuff, some of the people that use it as a business platform, but by and large, it's what these early on chat boards, when the internet first became widely distributed, that's what it is. And there's a lot of anonymity. It's got a problem, but here's the problem. It's not beholden to the federal government. The federal government, and for those listening, Section 230 is the thing that protects Amazon, and in particular, Twitter, Google, from having any kind of governing oversight. It's basically antitrust exemption. And until and if that is overturned, you're going to get what happened to Parler and what's on Twitter right now. So I guess the question is, Adam, it's Congress, House, White House, they're all in control of Democrats. There's a wide belief that the only people really ticked off about this is Republicans, but I sense there are some Democrats ticked off. And if the pendulum is swinging this way against Republicans, it will invariably go back the other way against Democrats, right?
Presumably so, and yeah, obviously the leader of the pack, the leader of our executive branch is obviously going to be changing very soon. We know that under the Obama administration, there were very sweet, sugary deals and relationships between the White House and Silicon Valley. And I think we can safely assume we'll probably see more of that between, the Biden administration and Silicon Valley as well. But all that being said, leading up to this election, we had over 48 states attorney generals bringing antitrust proceedings forward against big tech. And really, too, there was a lot of bipartisan support for this. So, do I think this is going to go away? For Google and for Facebook, definitely not. I think that they may see the burner turn down just a little bit, in terms of the speed at which this kind of creeps up on their business models. But, to say that these guys are in smooth sailing is definitely not quite the case. And thank goodness for that, because, the fact is these guys are living under Section 230 privileges that allow them to operate differently from most every other private business that's out there. But they're not living under it the way that it was intended to be utilized for social platforms. These should be existing as public forums, and the reality is they're just not. When you have people who are not elected to go in here and into these public forums and decide who can speak and who can't speak, or which conversations to talk about and which conversations to, press the mute button on, you've got a problem. And then to take that, one step further, not only did these big tech giants who enjoy Section 230 privileges, potentially, influence the narrative of a nation leading up to an election, but we're also now seeing how they can affect a private business. Parler is a 2-year-old company. It's a startup. And we literally just saw big tech collude to take a business down that, in 1 week they're number one in the App Store for downloads. And then the next week they are fighting for their lives in court against Amazon and Google and Apple. Like, how do you fight against these guys when you are smaller than, David's little brother against Goliath? Like,
well, yeah, we all know the big money behind Amazon. It's Jeff Bezos. Apple is Tim Cook. Google owns YouTube. They're one and the same. So there really is no outlet for a place like Parler there. Where do you go? Parler's not going to be able to build its own infrastructure and compete with any of those people. So you basically, given the way things are set up right now in our country, you are at the whim of people like, I forget the guys, @Jack at Twitter, Tim Cook, Bezos at Amazon. You're literally at the whim of whether or not they want you or not. And we saw Parler get squelched. My guess is if anybody strays off the reservation with anything else that might be posted on Apple, Amazon, or Google that doesn't fit their definition of what's right, well, they're gone. So what recourse is there?
Well, what's crazy, though, Ken? I just want to add this real quickly. So we saw big tech basically kind of come together to get rid of Parler. Jack Dorsey has he's been working on this project for a while called Signal. And, just a month after he signs a sweetheart hosting deal with Amazon to obviously support the millions of tweets that go out onto the Twitter platform, just a month after signing this sweetheart deal, Amazon then shuts down Parler, who is their most formidable competitor up and coming. And in the same week that now Parler is in a lawsuit against Amazon, Jack Dorsey's side project, Signal, is now number one on the App Store for downloads. So it's like if you're not in the cool kids club, you're just not in, right? And so
Jack Dorsey is the guy that runs Twitter.
Exactly right.
And Signal, and Signal is, I hope I described this correctly, correct me if I don't, but Signal is basically an app where it allegedly allows you to communicate with other people and not have it trace back to your IP address.
It in a nutshell, yeah, it's like an encrypted messaging app for communications. And, the thing is, though, is we the people, we're not stupid, right? We see what's going on, and generally speaking, people are pretty fed up with this. And so, it's no surprise that we've seen Twitter and Facebook combined literally just this week lose about $51 billion in their market cap. People are just kind of sick of it, and they're trying to find alternatives to these platforms because they're kind of sick of being taken advantage of, and they're sick of big tech basically weaponizing itself to pick winners and losers. That's just not how our system works.
Adam Rizzieri, our guest, he's a marketing strategist. I want to talk about what's next. Well, what happens now? Because, as I said, Parler can't build its own infrastructure. So those of like mind that were on Parler or wanted an alternative to a lot of the nonsense, and there is a lot of nonsense on Twitter, where do you go? Where do you turn to other than Congress overturning or suspending Section 230?
A few ways to take this. So as a user that was, on Twitter for a while, but then you were on Parler for a while, and now you're just like, okay, now where do I go? This platform called Gab.com, a lot like Twitter, but it was basically attracting something like 10,000 users a minute after the Parler takedown, and that's kind of like a Parler in a way. It's a lot more right-leaning in terms of the users that are on that platform. I know Parler made an active effort to the tune of offering $20,000 a pop to left-leaning influencers who could sort of, kind of bring the echo chamber more towards an actual, conversation on two sides of a table. Gab, I think, is trying to work towards that same direction, but it's got a ways to go. And the way they're sticking around, though, is they're actually paying for their own hosting and their own servers. So they're supporting their own physical servers to run their platform. So, if you're looking for a really high-performance sort of experience, go into this with your expectations just a little bit low, because these guys are doing their absolute best, and they just don't have the capital that a company like Amazon has to support all of the hosting and all of the messages that would, kind of take place on their usership or on their platform. It takes a lot of money to support all the servers that support the millions of communications, right?
But Adam, that if this Gab.com gets a little too big for its proverbial pants in the mind of Tim Cook and Apple, you're not going to be able to find that app on the Apple Store, will you?
You're not going to find it there today. It's literally Google Play and the App Store do not allow Gab. You have to go to Gab.com to actually create your account and to use the platform. You're not going to find this on the App Stores at all. And that's how kind of, I don't want to say below the radar these guys are. They were just kind of blacklisted from the start, So, explore that platform, take it for what it is, know that it is a place that is truly trying to live by the premise of supporting free speech. And now, so that's kind of what you can do as a user. Now, what you can do as a citizen is continue to promote, obviously, the push for reforming Section 230. I don't think it's right to get rid of it, because it is important to keep these social platforms as public forums, and we got to protect the forums from legal liabilities to do so. But we just need to standardize kind of how it, the rules of the game. Congressman Massey from Kentucky, he was really just kind of saying, why can't social media just exist like a public forum? The things that you book forum, you can't engage in defamation, you can't, incite threats, or you can't make threats or try to say that you're going to physically harm somebody, and you can't use extreme profanity. Just plainly state that criteria. And I think, really, why can't we just make Section 230 sort of exist like that? Yeah. And then don't allow the leaders of big tech to come in here and try to be the referees, right?
Yeah.
So
well,
about antitrust. That's got to happen too.
It is antitrust. It's censorship, and the Democrats think they've got the Republicans on the run. But eventually, it could come home to haunt them. We'll see. I don't know. I mean, Amazon, Apple, Google, they're all funded and owned by people that are really, really on the left. It may never come to that. I don't know. We'll see. I'm not really encouraged by this. I don't think it really becomes Section 230 tweaking. I don't think it comes to anything like that until and if there's a regime change in the House and the Senate. We'll see. Adam Rizzieri, good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you again, and you stay well in 2021. We need to hear your voice.
Always a pleasure, Ken. Thank you, sir.
Adam Rizzieri, Chief Marketing Officer with a company by the name of Agency Partner Interactive.